How to record history? That is the big question we are asking today. Have you ever wondered how things, some things have happened long time ago and then they get recorded somewhere and then they become history? That is what we are going to basically discuss in a very, very, very simple, short way. We have a very fascinating and special guest with us today. We have Malvika Bhatia. Malvika Bhatia. Hello, Malvika.
Hi.
And Malvika is essentially the archive director at Citizens Archive of India. And I'm going to actually ask you to describe what you do because I read your bio. I have it
Yeah.
here, but I think it's
Yeah.
better you tell us.
Yeah, I think a lot of people ask me that question when they say, "What exactly is that?" I run something called the Citizens Archive of India, and I have done so since 2017. It is an oral history archive, so it's a purely digital archive. I built it from scratch, where and primarily we have a few projects going on, but we collect oral histories and material memory in a digital format. So we've primarily been collecting the stories of anybody born before 15th of August 1947. Anybody who has some connection to the subcontinent, born before 15th of August 1947. And their everyday stories. A lot of people assume that I'm a partition archive, and I don't blame them. There are a lot of great partition archives and historians and projects out there. But we look beyond just the partition because there are so many people doing such wonderful work there. So literally anything. There are people who talk about the freedom movement, of course. There are, of course, people who also talk about the partition, but also things like people's first radio set, television, soap, shampoo, more personal things like menstrual hygiene, anything, just how people have lived like their life. If they were in what is my grandparents' generation, simply because we are losing that generation and we are losing their stories. And I wish I had started recording these stories 10 years before I actually started. But they tell us about their lives, and they tell us about their everyday lives. And then that then includes things like the freedom movement for those of them who have experienced it, and things like that. That's what I've been doing. We run a couple of other projects as well. And if you want me to get into the details of that, I
We
can.
will.
If you want.
We
Yeah.
will, we will, we will go through your life history, Malvika. Don't worry.
Okay.
And like, but let me introduce our union leader of spectators today. This is a very special day for me, Malvika. I must tell you because we started this podcast called "Explain Like I'm 10," where the
Right.
format is that we get an expert slash guest like you, and then you
Right.
talk about a subject expertise area where I ask questions. But I wanted a third person who has no clue what the subject is, who the guest is, so that they
Right.
just end up here for the recording and they're like, oh shit, ab main kya karunga, karungi, slash karungi, and then like, and so it progresses, and that's what adds the fun element of it. And for the first time, the union leader of spectators term is being given justice because Shweta is an actual spectator of this podcast. So till
Okay.
now we have been getting people from within IVM and our friends who are comedians, etc., to become the union leader of spectators. But Shweta is our first spectator who is now claiming that she's a union leader. So she's going to represent the listeners in a very real sense. Hello, Shweta, and thank you so much for doing this.
Very excited to be here. Firstly, thank you, Meghnad, for this opportunity. As my introduction, forget my background and everything,
Yeah.
just for Malvika's sake, I've been a corporate lawyer for like a corporate counsel for 9 odd years, and then I've been in the F&B industry now for about 5 years. But I'm a huge podcast consumer, a huge consumer of many IVM podcasts, and in that sense, I'm the true spectator or like the clueless YouTube commentator. So you're going to get all basic questions, but also a big history buff. And when you said oral histories, I was so fascinated. I was like, wow, that is a lot of verification. I really want to
Yeah.
know what you have to say about so many things now.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
That's true.
that's what I was also coming to, Malvika, and I think that's a great starting off point
Yeah.
here for us. So when we read history, there is this whole thing about someone has recorded it somewhere. right? And
Yes.
then that is synthesized over the years into a format which I'm reading it in. And again, so it's like narratives upon narratives upon narratives upon narratives, and then you get to where you are today when you have it in a book or like in a documentary or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So we did this episode actually called "What Is History," with Manu Pillai. Manu Pillai actually told us what history is, etc. So this is like a part two of that conversation, because I wanted to delve deep into how it's recorded, and that is where you come in. So
Right. Big shoes
tell
to
me a
fill if
little
I'm
bit about
doing.
this.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, so how it's recorded, I said big shoes to fill if I'm following Manu Pillai. Anyway, yeah, so sorry, your question was how it's recorded, right?
yeah.
Yeah, very simply,
Or
like,
can we just start with what is history first, with you as well, right?
sure.
So in short,
Sure,
yeah,
sure. So there is the history, and I'm going to explain like we're 10 because I
yeah,
find that the easiest way, especially when I tell people I'm an oral historian.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very few people get that. My father, who is, one of my biggest cheerleaders, till very recently used to tell people she works in conservation. And I had to keep saying, Dad, I don't do that. Don't tell people that. But, but he's got it now. And so what is history? What is oral history? Let's come to. I think
Yeah.
history is the recording, any kind of record of the past.
Hmm.
Okay, let's simplify it into that. And a lot of people say, Meghnad, what you just told me, that it is recorded by a certain person. It is put usually into a, if you're lucky, interesting book. If you're in school, a boring book. And,
Hmm.
you're supposed to learn it, and you
Yeah.
don't quite know why through those years in school. And but I was one of those odd characters who really liked it, even though came in very boring books. And but I also, it is also people sort of telling you about their past. And when we record the stories of India's first citizens, as I like to call them, the people who were born into an independent, or were alive when independent India was born, um, and saw it become, from a colony, go from a colony to an independent nation, and has been built up over so many years. The stories they tell, when you put all of their individual experiences and stories together, just because it's not been written by a historian doesn't make it not history. You put those together and you
Hmm.
get a very different history of the country. So far, we're a very small archive in the last 5 years, and we're a two-person team at the best of times. We've recorded about 600 hours of these histories, and we collect photographs, personal letters, things like that, newspapers, documents, passports. I've got all kinds of things. We have close to 5,000 of those items, somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 items. I do need to count. The last time I counted was just over 4,500. Um, but no, I have a catalog that tells me that number. But when you put those stories together, that also is a history. And a lot of people ask me, like Shweta said, that's a lot of verification you must
Hmm.
you must do.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, especially college students, when I go and maybe teach a class, or school students will say, but how do you know it's true? And to them,
Hmm.
my answer is, but when you're reading a book, do you just take for granted that it's true? Yes, there is a huge level of research that goes into it. But the author also comes with a bias, because that is only human. So the
Hmm.
teller of any history comes with a certain bias, right? And the thing about collecting hundreds of oral histories is that I actually verify them against each other as well as against what we know to have happened,
Hmm.
and try to remove as many biases as I can of my own before going into an interview. And as to your question, how do we record it? Well, face to face with a camera and a mic is the very simple answer. But also, since COVID, like we're recording this podcast just now, and your studio is so great, I'm going to ask you about how how it is to work with us. This. So, yeah, Zoom calls. We did a lot of Zoom calls. We stopped our work much earlier than most because I deal
Hmm.
with elderly people, and with
Hmm.
COVID, that was a big risk. And I deal with people in their 90s, in their hundreds. We've got so many, and we didn't want to put them at risk. So in Feb 2020, we stopped even before the world had stopped.
Hmm.
And by all of 2020, nobody was comfortable doing online interviews. And by Jan 2021, even 100-year-olds said, Zoom, yep, I know how to use that. And slowly now we've
Wow.
been getting interviews all over the world, and it's solved a big budget issue for us in terms of how can we travel
Right,
anywhere we need to be, with a
right.
two-man team. It just doesn't happen. So now we do online interviews, and it's great.
Sorry,
We can wait and
there
then we
is.
can start.
Yeah, that's you. Okay, wait.
We'll just wait for a minute and we can start.
Yeah.
No, no, I'll mute. Whenever the sound comes, I'll mute. So you'll have less
Now,
editing.
now it's done. Yeah, now it's done. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Shweta, I wanted to ask you. You are a history buff. I'll put the same question to you as well, which is what is history, but also how do you think it's recorded?
So when Malvika was explaining what is history to her, and when she said that when we read history in a boring book, we don't consider that we assume that there is a bias. I don't think as a consumer I have ever assumed there is a bias on the teller's part or on the writer's part. And definitely history coming through textbooks is considered sacrosanct, which is another whole can
Yeah.
of worms.
Yeah.
But but coming back to your question, Meghnad, when you said ki, what is history to me? History to me is listening to those stories, and like Malvika said, whether the big stories or the small ones, like it could be a newspaper article, an ad. So what reminded me about those small things in the past was my nanny used to always talk about this cream called Afghan snow. Okay, and
Okay.
I for the life of me had never seen or known this product, and she was like, that is the only OG beauty product we had. Beautiful product. I was like, okay, hota hoga. And
Love
then
it.
I came and I asked my other grandmother, do you know about Afghanistan? And she's like, no, we didn't have access to all this. Too much privilege your other grandmother has. So I was like, okay, fine. So I was
But
like,
what
okay,
is
fine.
Afghan snow? Sorry, I don't know
Yeah,
what
I
this
have
is.
also never come across this. I'm going to
So
start
it's
asking
the
people.
Pond's cream ka older version. So it was basically
Oh.
a face cream, and it was called Afghan Snow, and it was like a basic moisturizer cream which they used to use. And my nanny used to be like, ये सब क्या चल रहा है, मेकअप लगा रहे हो तुम लोग, क्रीम लगा रहे हो, मॉइस्चराइजर लगा रहे हो, ये वो लगा रहे हो, हम लोग के लिए सिर्फ अफगान स्नो था. So that's what is, so these small things, but there is hardly any way to figure out whether what she's saying was only her part of the world or her town or I mean, so
Till where Afghan snow reached in the larger scheme of things. And why was it called Afghan snow? Did it
Why
come from
Afghan snow?
Afghanistan?
Huh?
Yeah.
no, so she said, I asked my nanny this, and she said ki because those women were gori chitti and beautiful, तो उसका
Oh,
branding वैसे था.
अच्छा, like
insane.
Fair and Lovely का predecessor
हाँ
Afghan.
बहुत
अच्छा,
predecessor.
love.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, so the snow is basically,
A
obviously,
white
also indicative
cream.
of that. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
But I
But,
love that. See,
yeah, go on.
can I just interrupt you though for a second?
Yeah,
And
yeah, go on, go
I
on.
have to say that I meant, maybe I misspoke, but I meant exactly what Shweta said, that we take those textbooks as sacrosanct, and that's why people ask me that when I, record oral histories, how do you know that it's true? And that's when I say that what you read in a book, that also comes with a certain level of bias. So the people who give me the recorded histories, is it true? Yes, in their experience, in their memory. And memory, you have to remember, as a good oral historian, you have to remember that memory is a fluid thing. So it is my job to bring it back to the office, compare it with those books which have been written by serious academics who have done their research, hopefully, and so, and but the fact that we take anything that we read in a book is sacrosanct, it may not always be. There are authors who will, refresh their own work from time to time. You see it in a newspaper all the time, where they'll put in a line saying this article was, it was originally published saying such and such, but actually we made a mistake here. It happens everywhere, and similarly with oral histories, which is why when you take so many of them, Afghan Snow, for instance, and I'm going to start asking my interviewees about this cream. I love it. I have so many histories of these products. And, I don't only ask one person. So say if I'm coming to interview Shweta and I say, and Shweta tells me I used Afghan snow in my time, or Shweta's Nani used Afghan snow. But then I will also go maybe in my next interviewee maybe Meghnad's Dadi, and I may ask her, what is Afghan snow? And it happened to us once, in fact, if I may use
Yeah.
an example. A couple of years ago, at least I'm based in Mumbai, there was a cyclone, and all the papers published, first cyclone ever and all. I don't know, since or in so many years, and over the Arabian Sea. And my colleague called me up and she said, listen, it is not the first cyclone. We had one in 1948. And I was like, what? She goes, yeah, remember we went to that uncle's house. He told us about that cyclone. He lived in Mazgaon. So then I said, yes, correct. So we looked through the archive, which is not as easy to do from home as it was to do from the office. But we can do it. And we found an instance of this cyclone, and then we put it up on our social media. And it was really well received, saying that, and that's when people say that, and we literally put it as when people always ask us, how true is oral history? But there are things in people's memories. And then we looked up old newspapers and things, and then we found in the Times of India also, I think. And then one Sydney newspaper, I remember, because we really searched. And then we found that, yes, in 1948, there was a cyclone. Then I called my grandfather's brother also, and I checked with him because he has a phenomenal memory. So he said, yes, there was. And it gets forgotten so easily. So oral history in that sense has a real value. And I mean, what is a cyclone that happened in 1948? Makes no difference to you or me today. But when we're looking at how even weather is changing, climate is changing, and someone wants to look that up, sometimes you'll find it in a small little archive like ours, where someone has just told you, I think in this year. And they are never going to tell you, the interview is never going to tell you कि 1948 में cyclone था, कि in 1948 I have used Afghan snow, and then in 1950 it became ponds. You have to look up the dates and all, then you have to put it. So that's how it works. So it is a lot of work.
Interestingly enough, now I have to also share a story now that you're telling me about your respective dada dadis. So my grandfather used to tell me this story. He was in Delhi when India became independent, right? And he was in like his first year of college or something, something around that. Very young. And he told me that the day it happened, the day we got independence, etc., a lot of his basically fellow students were also in the movement. Essentially, they would go for protests, they would go for events, and they would go to like this coffee place where they would at least discuss what is happening and things like that. So when the day it actually happened, he used to live somewhere in North Delhi, which is very far away from central Delhi, and then it also seemed further. So he and one of his friends got onto a cycle, and they found out that Nehru is going to give a speech because we got independence. So they cycled furiously to the parliament, right? And then there's this giant crowd there, like it's like everything. So then they found a tree, and they climbed up on top of the tree, and then they realized that what they have done, because many other people started climbing on top of the tree, and two branches broke and people fell down, but theirs didn't. And then they were not able to hear anything that was happening, but they were able to see that, oh, kuch to speech ho raha hai. So he was there when the speech was actually given. He saw it, but he didn't hear it. So then he later went back home, and then they repeated it at some point, or someone narrated it very excitingly about what happened. So then he was matching his visuals with what he had heard. And the weird thing though, okay, I must point out, Malvika and Shweta, my grandfather, again, my judging of my grandfather's narration is also based on how many times he has told me this story.
Exactly.
Old people tend to do that, right? They have this one memory in their head, and then they keep like telling you like whatever. Now this branch situation was added later. I specifically know this. Like this, he had not given this little detail before. So I don't know if I should trust that part of the story. I did know he was in Delhi. I did know he was in North Campus. I mean, I'm willing to believe. I can still feel like he was there somewhere, maybe compound pe he was sitting or whatever. So my question to you, Malvika, here is that it's very difficult to trust oral history for this reason, right? Because
Yes.
memory tends to get distorted. Not just distorted, but you also want your memories to be more, like exciting, I guess.
Everybody
So we
adds
keep doing
masala.
that.
Yes.
हाँ,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
ड्रामेटाइज हो जाती है वो बॉलीवुड स्क्रिप्ट की तरह, एज हो
हाँ.
जाती है थोड़ी सी.
Right, right.
Correct.
And now that I'm telling it, maybe unconsciously I have also dramatized it a little bit more than what he had told me, because he didn't tell it like this. But
Yeah.
you get the point, right? So in this case, do you like record it and then also like give a disclaimer that listen, this is based on memory. Please take it with a pinch of salt.
Not quite. When we do give it to researchers, we do tell them, listen, we do our own verification. Now, no one can ever verify if your grandfather fell off that branch or didn't fall off that branch.
Yes.
But also, again, once you do enough oral history, you kind of can tell when someone is really making it up. I have interviewed 300 people, over 300 people. It has happened once. Yeah. You know that when he's telling you this, and honestly, why would he make it up? Like, that's a really long story to tell. So sometimes little masala here and there. Look, we all do it. We all add it, right? Now, that much you may have to take for granted when someone's doing research. But what happened factually, that Nehru gave a speech that people did gather around, that people did climb on trees. I have multiple people tell me that story, that they climbed up a tree and they heard it.
Oh.
And but I do have people saying that, ki wahan pe there were speakers and we could hear it. So God knows which tree he was on. My next question
That's
to
true.
him would have been, where exactly were you sitting in that crowd? And that also, it happened in 1947. Of course, he has forgotten which tree he was sitting on. Okay. So you do have to do that. I was interviewing someone and she lived in Calcutta. And I said that, what was it like? Because Calcutta also faced a lot of the partition riots and I asked her, I said, what was it like? And she said, when did we get our independence? 1945, no? And she couldn't remember the year, because this is not something you think about. This is something that if you have gone to school in India in the 80s and 90s, it's been told to you in those textbooks. And so, 15th August 1947. But for someone who went to school before that, this is not a date that in their 90s they necessarily have in their head. So when their memory is fading. So, it's quite strange how memory works. You very much do have to keep it in mind. But a good oral historian can also tell when someone is really adding mirch masala. That is usually, I will say, not the case. People have so many stories to tell which are so interesting on their own. They're not just making it up when you go to them.
Yeah.
Because also we don't ask for some fantastic story. The amount of times I will say young enthusiastic kids call me and say, we want to do an internship and we want to become a partition historian. And then I say, but why? There are so many. Why don't you come do? Why just the partition? If you come to me with a concrete reason as to why the partition, sure, come and become one. But why do you want to? And they say, because we want to, those stories of the trains and people dying. It's like, you have already decided in your mind what story that person's going to tell you. So you're looking only for that. And what happens with that is that you miss out on, they may not have had, they may not have had that awful partition experience. There are enough people who came other ways as well. But you already in your mind discarded key, because there's one standard, that narrative. You think that when you become a partition historian, and there are so many out there who are friends and are doing a phenomenal job. And I had this conversation with them also. I said, how many interns do you get, or potential interns who say, they're like, yeah, they all want the train, horrifying train.
Yeah.
But you're missing out if you go in with that mindset, you're going to get one kind of a story. If you go in with a mindset, that generation sat on trees and heard Nehru or saw Nehru, you will not get someone else's experience. I know a story of a couple who came, both studied in Lahore and made it back a few days before independence. And both worked or volunteered in the refugee camps in Delhi. and family was in India, so they weren't refugees. They just came back home
Hmm.
from college, and they said, "Yeah, we were both there at the time, and they were already engaged, but they
Hmm.
didn't know that the other was there." And they compared their stories later on.
Oh,
Acha, you were there. I
okay.
was also there.
Hmm.
So everyone has a different experience, but how do you know that it's true? The truth is, you don't always. You have to be a little
You
discerning.
said, actually, that's very interesting, because
Yeah,
now that you say that, oh, there were other people who also told you they were sitting on trees. I
yeah,
would say that my grandfather was there, maybe not sitting on trees or whatever, wherever he was sitting, but that did happen. So in my head now, I'm like, yeah, multiple other people have said this.
huh,
So maybe that
yeah,
is one way to sort of verify also. Like
yes.
independently, they have said the same thing. But Shweta, I was just thinking about this, right? Uh, so with our grandparents, right? I always wonder this in a lot of ways. Like as you said, partition history, right? Now that is documented. There are many people who have given their sides of the story, etc. But my grandfather in Nagpur was not affected by the partition per se, right?
Hmm.
If during that time, he has very faded memories of what really happened during the independence, because he's like, I don't know. I mean, like, sure, he's an artist, right? He was making movie posters. Like literally like those theater में जो बड़े बड़े movie posters बनते हैं ना, he had more stories to tell about that than anything else, which is like, oh yeah, वो movie आया था ना अमिताभ बच्चन का, I drew him, and then everybody appreciated. So every movie release was like a piece of art time for him, which was very fascinating to me. But these stories are so rare, no? Like, how did people live during a particular time? And these are all people who have been alive, so I could actually talk to them.
Hmm.
But how do you go further back, right? It's some questions that I had. Like Humayun, I think Humayun was the one who fell down the stairs and died, right?
Yeah,
uh, it-
they say.
was there a dude who was watching Humayun and wrote it somewhere, or is like telling his grandfather, अरे पता है वो ना ऐसे slip होके ना ऐसे गिर गया, ऐसे tumble and died. It's like that was the king dying, guys. Like library के stairs से गिर गया. Is there someone like that, or like is there any way to find that out?
Well, so was your question for Shweta or for me?
No, I mean Shweta can just step
Well,
in whenever. So I was just sort of using her as a sounding board. So yeah.
so I would say, but exactly this, what we record is exactly this. Somebody in Nagpur who was not affected by the freedom movement. This is not the
Yeah.
only story. I want to know now. I want to interview this person, by the way, about the movie posters,
He's
and
passed, unfortunately, he's passed like 2 years ago. Yeah, but yeah.
but and also then we digitize the posters if he's got any lying at home, because that is very much
Mm,
an art and people
mm,
love it. Movie
mm,
memorabilia, it's a big thing. I visited somebody's house with a colleague, and he had this wonderful collection that he's just been buying up of Gandhi memorabilia, Gandhiji's
mm,
memorabilia, letters, handwritten speeches, all of it. Some things from Subhash Chandra Bose's personal collection. And then one thing my colleague and I took out, and he said, Ari, you can ignore that. And I said, why? And he said, no, that's just a Vaijayanti Mala poster. And I was like, no, I want the Vaijayanti Mala poster also. Because, and even my colleague turned to me and she said, how much we work with so much Gandhi and Bose, and it never stops being fascinating. But no one ever gives us Vaijayanti Mala. Even this I want want to record.
This
So,
actually
that is,
happened with me. So I started a collection of
huh.
pins that people wear during election rallies. Like these
There you go.
these
Typings.
tiny, matlab, like like these paper things with like pins that went through. So there are like some with like Nehru ke rally ka,
Yeah.
Gandhi went and did a rally and people had those pins, etc. And then there was this one very random party which had like a lamp on it and like something happening. I can't read the name, but I just
Huh.
bought it anyway because it was like, oh, kuch to hua tha. I don't know what party this is, but I just want it. It's so fascinating. But Shweta, I wanted to ask you one question here. Uh, where did your grandparents come from, or what area were they in, etc.?
So, huh. So my grandparents, all four of them, have passed on now.
Hmm.
But all four of so both my grandparents were in central services.
Hmm.
were in Indian government services.
Hmm.
So they traveled a lot all over the country for work. So I
Hmm.
wish they were around. I would have immediately asked Malvika to get in touch with them, because they would have all these. So they've told me so many stories, right, about traveling idhar posting ho gaya to idhar ki story, udhar posting ho gaya to udhar ki story.
Hmm.
And there are so many. And like Meghnad said, they were not affected by partition because they were growing up in Maharashtra. So they
Right.
were very
Yeah.
isolated from the whole violence aspect, and it was like
Hmm.
a victorious day for them. And one of my nana, he was in the IAS, and he was in income tax. So he has all these stories of raids of superstars, and like kidhar kidhar paisa mila, like so many stories, and also like about government policy back in those days, and
Hmm.
what it
Yeah.
meant to be a government servant in those days, and
Yeah.
why he did what he did. Also, he came from a very small town called Karwar,
Hmm.
which is like a port town, a small town on the coast.
Yes.
So he and his mother left behind his father and migrated to Bombay, and
Hmm.
he
Okay.
educated himself.
Hmm.
Like, he earned,
Hmm.
he gave tuitions to
Hmm.
kids in those days and educated himself. So there is so much backstory there, which I'm
Hmm.
sure would be very nice for Malvika to document,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
even she would get a lot of verification type
Yeah.
documents on such stories also.
Shweta, funny thing, I used to think, no disrespect to your grandfather or whoever, but I'm going to say something which might be a little controversial. So when my grandfather was telling me his stories, both sides of grandfathers, they were like, हाँ हमने हमारा खुद का कमाया था, हमने खुद educate किया खुद को, tuition दिया. My grandfather used to sell balloons or something, whatever he was doing. Then I was talking to other grandfathers in my vicinity. All of them had a story like this, because during that time there were not very many rich people around. Like, there were people who were, I mean, I think 80% of our population must be like BPL by today's standards, right? Like, everybody was struggling to eat. The time
Yeah.
was also very weird, where the British had just left, and in India was so. That's very fascinating for me as well, because once I hear many of these stories is when I'm trying to form this picture of, everybody had a story of struggle, everybody. So then
Yeah.
during that time, the atmosphere must be like that. Yeah, you were saying something, Shweta?
Yeah, so I was saying that I agree with your point that income levels and poverty and general lifestyle was really, standard of living was very low back then. But what really fascinated me about my Nana was that he
Hmm.
took his mother out of her marriage. Like, they left the
Right,
father
that's true.
behind, which was,
Hmm.
I mean, for him, it was scandalous. But
Hmm.
That was
he
a big
still
deal.
made that move because
Yeah.
his father was an alcoholic. So they left him in the Gao, and he moved with his mother and all the siblings. So
Hmm.
Interesting. Hmm.
moving everybody to a city, forget the income and the
Hmm.
expense and all that, but just leaving a husband behind, it's
It's
That's
a
quite a
true.
big deal.
stigma. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a big deal.
It's a big deal for someone to do it today from, say,
Hmm.
a small town, especially, and say, I'm taking you and leave your husband and come.
Hmm.
But that's why we focus on, when we start an interview. I ask the person. So, for instance, if I'm interviewing Meghnad, and Meghnad, pretend you are 90 years old, and
Done.
and I come and I say, and usually, and I'm very casual with them. This is not something, I don't walk into their house, put a camera and a mic, and start.
Hmm.
Okay, here, sign a piece of paper agreeing that
Hmm.
you agree to take this interview. I own the copyright, and that's that. I sit with them. I have chai with them. They
Hmm.
usually, because they are my grandparents,
Chalo,
they
I
are
have
not
coffee
British,
start.
they feed you
Yeah.
all of that. Then when you make them comfortable, you put on them camera mic, and then I start, and you still have to make them comfortable. This is
Hmm.
not, I can't ask them what their deepest, darkest personal secrets.
Hmm.
So I usually say, what is your full name? Where were you born? When were you born? What is
I'm
your
I'm I'm
father?
I'm I'm doing this with you, Malvika. I'm
Okay,
doing
okay,
this with
done,
you.
done, done.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay,
wait.
what is your
But
full name, Meghnad? Meghnad uncle, I'll have
Meghnad's
to call you.
Yes, my full name is Meghnad Atul Sahasra Bhojni, and I was born in Nagpur.
Okay.
Yeah, anything else
And
you need?
when were you born?
Oh, I'm 90 years old, right? So the
Okay.
90,
Meghnad,
Roughly.
maths is not your
Roughly.
strength.
no,
Calculator
it's
use
not
karo.
my strength. Thanks, Shweta.
Roughly,
1945,
roughly.
I was born in. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
You are 77, 78 years old. Chalega.
yeah. Okay, yeah.
So,
Chalo.
okay. And then I'll ask you your father's name. So, what is
Hmm.
your father's name?
Atul.
Okay. And what did he do?
My father, I'm making shit up now because I will he be a chartered accountant? Then no. My father was an IAS officer with the British.
Okay. So from there, and what happens with these people is they usually light up the minute I ask them what their father's name or what their mother's name is, and what the
Oh.
father. And then all I do is I make them talk about their parents, memories of their parents, their first home, their first school.
Ah. Hmm.
And then that's like saying open sesame. And I do get a lot of people. So let's move away now. I don't want to, for the rest of this, let's try not to talk about, say, the partition or even the freedom movement. But I talk a lot to people about, I interviewed this 100-year-old woman. It was the most
Hmm.
difficult interview I've ever done because she spoke a Malayalamized dialect of Tamil because she
Hmm.
was a Tamil woman who lived in a very small town on the border of Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And she was 100 years old. And she spoke this sort of very Malayali-ized Tamil,
Hmm.
neither language that I speak. And which was really difficult. I mean, I was going home. My mother happens to speak Tamil, and I said, "You're going to have to translate this whole thing for me, ma." And
Hmm.
she's
Hmm.
she's looking at me like I'm crazy. But and she said that what British? I don't know. I didn't know that they
Hmm.
ever came to the country because we forget how large our country is and how few people living in small towns and villages were actually affected by this. And
That's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of them, if you interview a lot of people we've interviewed from Saurashtra, they grew up in princely states in Saurashtra because Saurashtra,
Exactly.
every few miles, there was a new state.
Hmm.
And they
Hmm.
Yeah.
remember there was this one gentleman who remembers entertaining the Maharaja. His father worked in the service of the Maharaja, and
Hmm.
he would go there for to entertain him and do some wrestling with some other friend and stuff. I can't remember, this interview was 5 years ago. Uh, yeah, but it's amazing. And they, while they may have known vaguely what was going on with the freedom movement in the city, they were aware that the British were there. They were very happy that they were living their day-to-day lives. And I explain this to a lot of people, like you and I, sitting in our comfortable homes. Yes, we're aware of the politics around us. We
Hmm.
hopefully, read the paper and make informed choices and vote and all of that. But how many people's day-to-day lives in a city, you're going to your job every day if you got a comfortable life, is affected by that politics day to day, that you will remember it 80 years from now if I ask you, ki us election mein ye hua tha, do you
Hmm.
remember? They're like, no, they
No,
also read it in a
nobody will.
newspaper. They also read it in a newspaper, you know.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
they will tell you what the newspaper from that time will say because that's how they consumed it. But ask them about, do you remember the first cricket match you went to? How much money did you pay for the ticket?
Right.
Oh,
Right.
the
Uh,
Yeah.
money, the money is not forgotten.
the
इतने
money is
आने
not.
का, इतने आने का
हाँ,
ये था.
हाँ, correct. My grandfather-in-law,
Hmm.
he's passed away, but I interviewed him many years ago, and my husband told me, he was not my husband at the time, we were yet to get married, and he said he's going to remember the cost of everything. And I could do a PhD on transport systems in Bombay, just the ticketing. From that interview, because he said, and his favorite way to start sentences, he was really sweet and we really miss him. But every time we asked him anything, his favorite way to start sentences was, money has completely lost its value.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I bought my first car for 2000 rupees. And today, and once my husband had to go buy a laptop, and he said, Nana, come with me, because his grandfather loved going to all these computer
Hmm.
technology shops. So he took him, he said, come, we go buy a laptop. And he told him, he said 40, 50,000 rupees, that was the entire turnover for our company back in the day, that kind of thing. So he said, this is a joke or what? You're buying a 40,000 rupee laptop. And he was
Yeah.
horrified. So,
Yeah.
it was like that. So, It's so money is a big thing. You ask them about cricket matches, ask them even about how the politics affected them day to day. I have this very wonderful story of a
But
gentleman.
wait,
Hmm.
sorry, Malvika, I have to just interrupt you here because I have to take a break and then we
Yes.
will come back to you continuing the story. So, guys, if you are someone who is listening to this and would like to be a part of the union leader of spectators gang, which I'm starting officially with Shweta, and next week also, hopefully, fingers crossed, we have another union leader of spectators, actually spectators lined up. We do want to increase our tribe of eulos, and we want to get you into this podcast so that you can also have this fun experience of randomly being put in a recording with a random guest talking about random things. So please write to me on meghnad@pratilipi.com or allaboutnow@pratilipi.com. You can also DM me on Twitter or at me Meghnad. My handle will show up here. So after the break, we come back, and I have very existential questions to ask Malvika also about how
Oh God.
do you choose who to record, whose history to record or not record or whatever it is, and also how to avoid one-sided narratives. More after this break. Coming back.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. Listeners, presenting to you Club Saris Says, the premium tier offerings of our podcast. Club members will get exclusive Cock and Bull episodes every Monday, extended and unfiltered versions of the guest episodes, access to the Club Saris Says Discord server, and audio offerings such as ad-free episodes and early access to guest episodes. Also, members get to decide the topics of the live episodes and get their name on the producer's slate at the end credits. On Cock and Bull, it's a cricket special episode featuring Akash and Sriram. They answer some AMAs from their listeners. On the Vox podcast, Monica talks to Tina Sidana, Business Development Head of Alexa Voice Services at Amazon. They discuss the key aspects of voice and audio marketing, content marketing, and advertising. On All Things Policy, Leah and Harshit discuss the importance and requirement of sex education in schools. And on Vartalab, Akash and Naveen have a fun chat with me, Abbas Momin, stand-up comedian and podcaster. They spoke about how Abbas, that's me, went from studying dentistry to writing and performing comedy and podcasts and his love for movies. Once again, don't forget to visit our merch store on ivmpodcast.com. We have some exciting stuff for you over there. Follow us on social media via IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If you like our shows, spread the word, tell your friends, and don't forget to rate and review them wherever you're listening to them. You'll also find all our shows on youtube.com/IVM Podcast. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week: LIC of India, Yono SBI, Cash Free Payments, and HDFC Mutual Fund. Thank you for making this possible.
How to record history? That is the question we are asking. Welcome to Explain Like I'm 10. I'm your host Meghnad, and with me we have Malvika Bhatia, who is a historian and an archivist with the Citizens Archive of India, and she was just telling us a little bit about how what sort of questions she asks her subjects when she interviews them. And also we have with us our union leader of spectators, Shweta. Hello, Shweta.
Hi.
Welcome back. And in the break, I just had another application of union leader of spectators from Malvika. So Malvika, please, now we will add your list name to the list.
Yeah, add me to the list. Add me to the list. Even I want to
That-
come and ask questions about something I know nothing about. How
yeah,
fun.
exactly. So yeah, continue, Malvika. You were saying, what sort of questions you ask
Yeah.
your subjects as well. I want to add a little bit to that as well about how you pick your subjects as well. And like, I mean, right now you gave me the example कि your grandfather-in-law is who you inter. So जान पहचान के ही लोग हैं, right? But like, did you
That's not the
otherwise?
case. I just
Yeah.
happened to use this example, and it started that way. So let me go back a little bit if I can and tell you how I got into this. One is completely by accident. I am not an archivist by degree. I wish I had a degree in archiving, but I do not. And oral history, my only
Wait 1
experience.
second, sorry. Is there such a thing as an educational qualification for
Yeah,
archiving?
you can get
Okay.
it if you want it. Yeah. But I will say that it is a kind of profession that learning on the job counts for a lot as well.
Of course.
And it is very, if you're, if you're a BA graduate and you want to work in archives, just come to one of us and say, hey, I want to work, and we teach you how to do it, which is also very, very valuable. The how I sort of find people and the questions I ask is what you're asking me. So I ask these very generic questions. Like I said, it's not all about the freedom movement. It's not all about the partition.
It's about
not
their
all about
life,
anything.
essentially.
It's about their lives. So I even ask questions about what was school like? What did you have a school uniform? Was it a co-ed school? If it was a co-ed school, were you allowed to talk to the boys if you were a girl, or the girls if you were a boy?
Right.
What language, what medium of education? How did you, if it was, say, Gujarati, for instance, when did you learn English? And I try to do interviews in mother tongues as far as possible. We've done interviews in 6 languages and collected material in about 8. So we have a letter in Malayalam, and we have an interview that's half in Sindhi and things like that, which is very difficult when you're a 2-person team. You try and get.
And do you have a geographical spread also, like for India?
Yeah, we do. It started out largely in Mumbai, and it started out largely with people I know, because I have never been an oral historian before I started doing this. And so it started with people I know and by word of mouth. And then we started getting in the press and things a little bit. And then people now just cold call and cold email us. And so we moved all over India, well, based in Bombay. So a lot of our in-person interviews happen here in Mumbai. But we do a lot, when we travel, my team and I, luckily, well, a little nerdy like that. My colleague went to Assam on holiday, and she said, "Chal, I'll take the camera and mic and go." And she
very nice.
And I said, you don't have to work on holiday. She said, I know, but now when I go back to Assam, let me interview at least one person over there. So it's very hard to reach an Assam. We don't have a massive budget and things like that, So when we go on holiday, we take the camera and the mic and we do some work, but that's purely out of passion. No one's going to come work for me if I tell them. If I say this on a public platform on holiday, also we work. But slowly that geography that has spread. We've got birthplaces. We record, the birthplaces of our interviewees, and we got people who are born as far away as Argentina, who have spent most of their life on the subcontinent. He's a British man. This person, we have one person who was born in Argentina. But he moved to India in the 60s. He married an Indian. He lived there. So his story, his experience of India is valid. So we're not looking for Indians. We're looking for someone with the experience of the subcontinent, so long as they are born before 15th August 1947. That's one of our projects. We have 2 more projects. So to also diversify, because we're such a small team, independent oral historians sometimes come to us and say that I want to learn how to do this. And how do I do it? Now, my only experience, I digressed a little bit, was that I grew up in a very large joint family. And I had multiple grandparents around. I was fortunate enough to know all 4 of my grandparents, but also my father's aunts and people that I grew up with, because my parents worked. They left me at home with the 2 grandmothers who were at home, who told me stories to keep my mind occupied. And I would ask them a lot about how they grew up and their siblings. And I was the oldest. I am the oldest of many cousins. They are the oldest of all their siblings, just coincidentally. So I've had a very good relationship with my grandparents and all of their siblings as the oldest grandchild in the family, in a large joint family. So who was left at home by working parents, because his grandparents were very happy to babysit. So, I grew up listening to these stories. Then I also married into a large joint family. And then I started asking questions there as well, because now I'm very comfortable doing it. And that's how, so I started using them, putting a camera and microphone in front of them and using them as guinea pigs, literally, because if I made a mistake, I could go back to them. And I think really irritated them at the end of it. But they were very kind about it, and they've been very encouraging and shared photographs and personal letters and all sorts of things. And then that gave me the confidence to kind of go out. So people would call in, hey, you're doing this. Just like Shweta said, I wish my grandmother, I would have asked Malvika about Afghans. No. And Meghnad would have told his grandfather to tell me about the tree.
Poster.
It,
Yeah,
at, at,
uh,
at
I would.
Bali.
That's it. So if my either of my grandfathers were alive today, I would definitely send them your way, because
Yeah,
I was thinking that way also, Malvika. I don't know how you get your money for like your organization. I'll ask you about that if you're
that is the
comfortable.
$1 million question, no?
Please tell me.
Yeah.
But think about, I was just thinking about it. Like, so my grandfather, who was an artist, he had a very unique life whenever he used to tell me about it. Like,
Yeah.
his whole life was disrupted because of the printing press, for example. Like
Yeah.
whenever the poster started being printed in giant presses, etc. उनका तो दिवाला पिट गया. मतलब एक रात में is like, fuck, I have no work anymore. What do I do now? So then he had to pivot and do something else. So I would actually pay you to interview him, and then I would get a copy of his whatever interview, and I would keep it, because that's such a
Ah,
valuable thing to have for me. I mean,
wow.
is that a
Is
thing
that a
that you have
business model?
explored?
I need to find more people like you, Meghnad. That's very generous. No,
Guys,
we
okay,
do.
no, we can do this. We can do this, guys. This is a public platform. ज़्यादा views नहीं आते हैं, but guys, if you are someone who would pay Malvika for something like this, please leave a
I
comment below.
no, I will say though, we do take donations, and
Yeah.
if anyone's listening to this and finds the work valuable, please go on our Instagram. You'll see a lot of great videos and stories and all those kinds of things. And if you find our work valuable, please do consider making a donation. It has to be from within India, the donation.
Yeah,
uh,
of
and
course.
uh, you know and I would that's we greatly appreciate that. But you asked how we funded it. We had a very generous. I am not the founder of this archive, I must say.
Okay.
Okay.
That is a gentleman called Rohan Parekh, who is a
Hmm.
businessman and a history buff, and he lost his grandmother when he was about to have his daughter, and he realized that her
Hmm.
stories will never be passed on the way she passed on, because he said, I can always tell my daughter
Yes.
her stories,
Yes.
but her stories I lose. Something always gets lost in translation.
Hmm.
And he decided to start this, and for the first 5 years he very generously funded it. He hired me to build it from scratch, and was just absolutely wonderful to work with, because I think he gave me my way in running it, and he said, you have a vision for it, here's the
Hmm.
money, take it and do it, which was lovely. COVID has been hard on everyone, and I think his
Right.
plan was always to kind of run it for 5 years. We were looking, he and I were both looking for funders, whether it's other
Hmm.
companies and things like that. But COVID's been so hard, it was really hard to find someone. And naturally, I also believe that yes, spare funds should go to COVID relief. That was the need
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
hour.
Hmm.
It's not very easy to say, come find my archive when there are people, hospitals clamoring for
No,
oxygen
that's
and
true. Yeah, yeah.
That's
so naturally, of course, the last 2 years, got very tough, and he still funded it through that, which was very kind of him,
very generous.
very generous indeed. And now what has happened is, and he had always sort of said, I have a 5 year period in which I want to do this, and then we'll find someone. We couldn't find someone. He very generously has handed it over to me. So I set up a Section 8, so charitable company under which it runs.
Hmm.
And yeah, and we're still looking for donations, and he's still very supportive. He doesn't fund the whole thing
Hmm.
now, but he's still extremely supportive himself. And
So
that's
if you
how
are,
that's how that's funded.
what we'll
That's
do
how.
for you, Malvika, is that we'll leave a link below for your
Perfect.
donation link. If anybody wants to, donate to you and the wonderful work you're doing, obviously we can do that. Shweta, do you have any questions for? I can see you had
I
something.
will also
Huh.
say over here, we are in the middle of transitioning this transition period, unfortunately. But I
Okay.
will give a link, and if people do want to donate, there's a way for them to just get in touch with me and donate.
Sure,
We're
sure, sure.
unfortunately in this transition period. Yeah.
For sure, for sure.
So I
Shweta,
just wanted to say that isn't this like a very desi ancestry.com? Like because they might have had so many genealogical records and
Yeah.
everything, but
Mm.
we as a subcontinent don't have
Mm.
as much written history, but a lot of oral history, right? And maybe a lot
Um,
of people in India or in the subcontinent would be interested in tracing back a lot of.
hmm.
yeah, I don't think this allows for tracing back so much. all the way. But we have had instances of two people who have settled down in Bombay after initially living in Karachi pre-partition and coming here. And I interviewed this gentleman, and he said, I lived here and I had this landlord. And I said, is this landlord's daughter's name Pushpa? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I just interviewed her because the name sounded so familiar. And
The story
they
was
turned
also
out they were
from
neighbors and tenants. And, so people do meet like that and things like that. But can you trace your ancestry back? I don't think so. You can do a
okay, if
lot
I
of
can,
other
no,
things.
if I
but
can
like a
ask,
story. Like
Yeah.
you can trace back stories.
Stories,
no,
absolutely,
also
especially
to
from common villages, things like that. Yeah.
also to pile on to what Shweta just said, like about the let's say not exactly like maybe a genealogical like tracing it back sort of a thing, but हमारे यहाँ पे I think family trees वैसे भी ज़्यादा maintain नहीं करते हैं, and like it's like history is not really written down because that's where I think we need to ask this question also, like, so there is obviously selecting a subject who you want to sort of take the story from and archive, but also the realization that what they have to say is important is also matters, right? Like for example, Afghan snow, like Shweta's grandmother telling her about Afghan snow, maybe she didn't think हाँ ठीक है कुछ तो था Afghan snow, she didn't think कि अरे इसको document करना पड़ेगा archive के लिए, somewhere I'll write it down or whatever it is so that my future generations will know there's something like Afghan snow. So Malvika, are you also like seeing this happening more, or are you like encouraging this in people?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, when I first started this, I thought it's very important to take, that whole freedom movement ka story. I didn't
Yeah.
think about things like Afghan snow. And I had a marketing historian come to me. Her name is Ramya Ramamurthy, and
Oh yeah,
she was, yes, and
I
she
know her.
was writing a book about brands that survived independence. And she called me and she said, hey, what do you know about brands of things? So I said, what things? She said, everything. And I said, what do you mean? So she said, I don't care. Biscuits, radios, shampoos, you name it, I want it. And that's when I realized that was luckily, and I bless her for this. And that was the day I realized that I have to start asking about Afghan snow. And what cream did you use? What was your beauty routine? What was your we had one woman tell us about contraception. It was
What?
unbelievable. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
please
yeah.
tell, please tell.
I don't know how much I should tell you, but she did say, she said, I lived in a time when, uh, your mother didn't, there was no sex education and your mother
Of
didn't tell
course.
you what happens.
Uh-huh.
And then I got married. And then I said, and then my colleague looked at me really funnily. And she said, are you going to ask her this? I said, if she's willing to tell me this, yes, I am. And I did. And I always do when an interview talks about something that sensitive. I always tell them, please do remember that I have a camera and microphone on, because I do think I'm pretty good
Of
at my
course.
job. They do forget that it's on, but I do
Right,
remind
right,
them if they are talking about, especially if they're talking about another family member or something like that, or if they're talking, which happens, if they're talking about something this personal. And I asked her, I said, Auntie, do you mind telling me what contraception was like and what you may have used? And she told me. She said, we didn't really know what we were doing, and it was very instinctive. And then we learned about condoms, and I think they called them, she said we used to call it French leather or something. I'll have to go back and check this, but yeah. And I was like, that's crazy. And I said, are you sure you're okay telling me this? She's like, of course, because she said, I believe I do have to tell, if I don't tell the younger generation. Her granddaughter's about my age. She said, my granddaughter asks me everything and I tell her everything. And what's the point of not doing it? Because, I mean, she said, if you're not open about this, what's anyone gaining from being secretive about sex?
Wait, how
And
old is this lady?
80 something.
Holy shit. Okay, that's quite something.
So I thought it was wonderful, and she was just so, and I told her, I asked her multiple times, I said, do you want me to edit this out? Because it is on, and it's not on a website for someone to just access.
Yeah, yeah.
Because people tell us really sensitive things like this also.
Right.
So, but when people are doing research, into how times and thought processes have changed. I interviewed, for instance, you know who Dr. Mahinder Vatsa is? If people in,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
the
Ask
Ask
this
This
expert.
Expert doctor
Yeah.
in the Mumbai
Oh,
Mirror.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
He's amazing. He's passed away, unfortunately.
Hmm.
Amazing. He was 93, 94 when I
Hmm.
interviewed him. And he told me how he was a male gynecologist who treated nuns. And because he said they felt safe coming to him and secure. And I said, how did attitudes change and things like that? And he talked about, sort of introducing sex education to Indian schools and curricula for that and all kinds of things. So if you don't ask the personal questions, and I ask a lot of people, men and women, about changes in attitudes, and when I talk about changes in attitudes, things like this one lady told us about contraception. Okay, this is not something I specifically asked, but I do ask about, say, menstrual hygiene. So you can see
Right.
how far we've come. We started talking about the freedom movement, and now this is what we're. So our archive really records everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then, and I've
Sorry,
had
Malvika, I'll interrupt you because
yeah,
Shweta had something on her mind which she wanted
yeah.
to, I think,
So
ask
I
also.
wanted to talk about the menstrual hygiene point,
Hmm.
and very surprisingly, I mean, at least I am surprised today looking backwards that my menstrual education came to me from my nanny. And my
Yeah.
nanny gave me the whole talk, and she told me what happens, what is a period, etc. Because no one told her. And she got her periods and she stained all her clothes, and it
Yeah.
was, and she applied Bernol because she thought she had cut herself playing or something.
Oh.
And then her elder sister told her, no, 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 this is something that happens to
Yeah.
women, etc. And you use this kapada and all, because that was the time.
Correct. Kapada was.
And then all that. But my nanny was like, no, no, we need to tell her what is a period. And my mom was
Yeah.
like, she's too young, we'll tell her when it is time. But my nanny was insistent, no, no, what if she has an experience like me? I don't want her rubbing Bernol. So,
Correct.
so I'm very surprised today at how, for lack of better word, progressive my nanny was in that sense.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
be like, let us bring these topics up with a teenager. And
Yeah.
the other thing that I wanted to say about my nanny was she used to read a newspaper, a Marathi newspaper and an English newspaper, until she could read, which was like 85, 86, even after her cataract and all, ऐसे करके, she used to read the newspaper every day. So that generation had that habit of reading newspapers much more than our parents' generation. So I think they would have far better memories to tell you also about the happenings of that time. No?
Yeah, in a sense, but I totally see what you mean about how progressive that generation was, because after doing hundreds of hours of interviews, I find that that generation really was progressive. Even, I mean, sorry to for a minute just to keep it women centric.
No,
I
no, please
realize that
do.
it is that generation of women, Shweta's Nani's generation, who really caused a lot of that change that we, the things that we take for granted. As educated, fairly well-to-do, people living in India today, look, this is not across the board. These are three of us sitting on a
Yes.
Of
podcast,
course.
right?
Yeah.
Come with a certain level of education and a background that allows for this much openness. But it is that generation that paved way for a lot of this change. That lady telling me that I have no shame talking about contraception, because I didn't know what it was till I realized I need to know what I need to do so I don't, when I don't want to have children. And or Shweta's nani saying the fear that she probably felt when she realized that she's suddenly bleeding. It's scary, and I think the biggest disservice we can do to our children is to not be open with them about about these things, because because it's a way of life. What's the point of being shy? It's better than them finding out in another horrible way. So so there is, I interviewed this woman who grew up in the 20s and 30s in Mathura, and and obviously from a conservative family, but she said that my father and my uncle didn't want me to go to school after the 6th standard. My mother, who was not very educated, and my aunt, who was educated in English medium, her Taiji, who was educated in English medium, she said in that generation, so you're talking about someone born in the late 1800s.
Late 1800s. Yeah.
1800s, if that lady's aunt, was
Wow.
educated in English medium school only till class 2, but was educated. And this lady told us, she said that kitab na, they used to say कि बस चिट्ठी लिख लेती है, रामायण पढ़ लेती है, काफी है, और ज्यादा कुछ हमें लड़कियों को नहीं पढ़ाना. रामायण पढ़ लेती है, that was the criteria कि इतना तुम कर सकते हो, तुम पढ़े लिखे हो, essentially you are literate.
Right.
And so she said I was good at my studies and I wanted to study. And I went and I told my mother and my father and my uncle, and uncle was the head of the family, absolutely opposed it. And the mother said, you go from one door, she would send her to school, and she said, I will take that fight. And she said, my mother full ghungat, there was no full parda, she said, tab parda rakhte the, aur unke jeth ke samne, so she could not say anything. And but they still, my mother and my aunt used to sneak me off to school every day. And she said then that became slowly 10th standard, 11th standard, the school added that class 11, and called it junior college. And the people around, the neighbors, she said, biradri walo, they said ki if you send your daughter to college, aap log jaat se bahar hum nikal denge aapko. We will consider you an outcast. So her mother, uneducated mother, said, aapko jo bhi karna hai karo, I will send my daughter to school. It was the same school. They just moved to junior college when they added class 11. Okay. The biradri wale put posters and all up saying these people are, And then when it came time for her to get married, the mother went around all those houses to give the wedding cards. And the mother would tell them, and she told her father, who I suppose was okay with his daughter being educated by that time. She told the father that I am going to go and I am going to tell them, but they had said, hum log jaat se bahar, so she'd go to their house with a wedding card, and she'd say, and they'd say, come in, for tea and all. And come sit and give the wedding card. And she'd say, why do you want to invite me to your house? I am not, you have considered me an outcast. So
passive aggressive max. It's like
burn,
Ab ye le card bahar se le le.
So she said her father said ki aise mat bolo aap, and how can you say this? And the mother said, you mark my words, all these people who have put these posters and all will come to the wedding. Wo khane aa jayenge. So, and of course, all
this is the old version of मैं उनके मुंह पे कार्ड फेंक के आऊंगी.
correct. Like करो जो करना है. I wanted to आना है शादी में finally.
Sorry, wanted to interrupt because this is very. I think this is very fascinating. But I just wanted to understand one thing. So let's say something like menstrual hygiene, right? Or something like childbirth, right? Like. One thing which we need to also highlight and tell people who are watching this podcast is that history primarily is written by winners, and mostly winners are men who are basically come from a very patriarchal mindset. And like, for example, they will write extensively about a war situation, which is basically happening and going on the front, and brave stories of the year, whatever. But they will never write about, let's say, a soldier who is female or a doctor who is female having menstrual hygiene problems and how that affected her work. That's also as important a part of recording of history as is the actual war that is happening in the front, if I may say so. Because I would get so much insight from that as well, right? Sorry, very random but similar example. Please, I'm just giving this example because it just came to my head. I was just telling someone on Twitter that I hate milk, right? Because I found out
that. Lactose intolerant tweet.
I went on a rant about lactose intolerance in the morning because I was like, milk is a scam. A lot of people around me are lactose intolerant, and my mom has fed me milk throughout my school life, and it struck me in the morning somehow that every morning whenever I had milk, every other day I would puke it out in front of the entire class, and then I would be embarrassed for the entire day, and for the first 3-4 periods I would just shut down and I would not pay attention to anything. So technically I was a bad student because of milk, right? I thought that should be recorded somewhere. Like, because I was going to prepare for this podcast, I was like, that was the effect of milk on me and lactose intolerance, which nobody talks about. That should be archived. But sorry, going back to the
It's
war
on
example.
But
Twitter
we should
forever
ask
now.
the historian in the room, na, कि कितने
Yeah.
Yes,
oral stories हैं about
exactly.
lactose intolerance.
Yes, now that I think about it, lactose intolerance, I have never asked anyone, but I'll ask now.
Please.
Because especially those who say कि हमारे घर पे एक गाय थी और हम
हाँ.
दूध पीते थे.
Yeah.
Now I will ask about lactose intolerance, just like I started asking about menstruation, and I must say that I also ask the men these questions. Okay,
Hmm.
when your sister, when your wife,
Yes. Uh,
what happened? And then, their grandchildren will come and ask me, I can't believe you asked my grandmother or my grandfather that. And the grandmother and grandfather are not bothered. They've also, I will say, that my favorite thing about interviewing this age group is they are so zen about their life. They're like, Jo bhi puchna hai, pucho. We have lived our lives.
ah.
They've gotten rid of all their inhibitions.
Hmm.
And quite frankly, you're going to an elderly person and putting a mic in front of them and saying, speak. So
Hmm.
it's like best, they they
Yeah.
love it. So yeah, so I do ask. It's not like I differentiate in the questions that I ask the men, and it's not like I only ask the women about menstrual hygiene. They may have more to tell me. A lot of the
Hmm.
men say, "Oh, we didn't know, or we didn't pay attention," and some will say, "Ha ha, my sister used to go away to one room for 3 days. I didn't really know
Hmm.
why."
Hmm.
That kind of thing. But lactose intolerance, I will ask now. Surely.
Sorry, that was a very random
But
example. Is
but
this
it's
like?
not. But we ask about illnesses. By the way, I have a vaccine certificate from 1911 that I posted. I think on the day I got my third shot or
Oh
something,
wow. Okay.
saying, "Hey, this is so cool. Why shouldn't I post it?"
Hmm.
So vaccine certificate. People ask about how vaccinations took place for what illnesses. We had a woman who was in the Rani Jhansi regiment of the Indian National Army.
What?
She saw, yeah, she saw action at the front.
Wow.
And she talked about how she broke her leg, and at the front means in Memio in Myanmar. There, she's like, there was not enough medication and things to get better quickly, even if it existed at the
Hmm.
front in the
Hmm.
middle of
Hmm.
November.
Hmm. Hmm.
And she talks about how, and she was demotivated, and she was 16, and Subhash Chandra Bose came to her bedside and actually gave her a motivating speech. Her mother was a recruiter for
Oh
the
my
INA.
God.
Okay.
And
Wow.
yeah, but
Wow.
she told us that people tell us about illness and how difficult it was to get over it. People tell us about the stigma of
Hmm.
tuberculosis. Uh,
Yeah.
my who told me this? So one lady told me that her sister-in-law, husband's
Hmm.
unmarried sister, had TB, and none of her other sisters-in-law would let her near their children. And
Hmm.
she said, no, I would say she loved playing with the kids, but she was stuck at home because of this TB and all of that. And I would let her play with my kids, saying there's nothing wrong.
Hmm.
We've had people talk about all kinds of illnesses and how it was how different it was to get better then and
So
now.
I have a question about that as well, and
Hmm.
I have actually two questions to ask towards the end. But one is, so tell me about the use case of what you do, right?
Yeah.
So I understand from what I gathered. Again, correct me, and Shweta, you can also add to this. From what I understand, the use case of archival of oral histories is a maybe pattern recognition to a large extent, which is
Mhm.
like, let's say, menstrual hygiene in the 20s versus menstrual hygiene now. What is the difference now, and what can we learn from each of them,
Mhm.
sort of a thing. Then there is, of course, the brand thing that you spoke about, right?
Yeah.
Companies rising and dying, and what consumption patterns look like, right?
Yeah.
Transportation, inflation, like, these are all patterns that you can probably do somewhat, not exactly very strict studies on, but at least you can get an insight on each of these,
But essentially,
right?
you are asking a consumer from 1940 how they consumed the product or how they
Sure,
paid.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. So that is one part I can look at it, right? But then the other part I can also look at it as nostalgia, just pure
Oh,
nostalgia,
yeah.
and it's fascinating. Like, I mean, a person like, say, for example, Shweta's grandfather, like, leaving father, drug father, away from and coming to this during that time is kind of crazy to me. Like, I mean, like, that must have taken immense courage, because abhi bhi log ye nahi karte.
Yeah.
So
And
there
how
are
did people
these
perceive that in which geography, in what community, in
precisely,
what religion, what. Yeah.
precisely. And I think the third, which is I think a little bit of a breakaway point, which I realized during this conversation, was about how, um, even though there were major events happening during that time in the subcontinent itself, it did not affect all people. They were
Yeah.
living completely different lives, and I think that is also very important to tell that sure, there was partition, it was terrible, there were stories happening there, but also in like Nagpur, an artist was struggling, and like he was
Yeah.
worried about his job and whatever education jo bhi hai. Or फिर in like Karnataka or Kerala something else was happening, maybe Dubai में trade खुल गया था and ships were going and he was watching. I don't know what happened then, but that's also
So,
very important.
so let me tell you about the most interesting, and I'm actually going to look up the
Hmm.
request. I have my email
Hmm.
open on another tab.
Right.
One of the most interesting requests I got was from somebody, and I won't name, I'm not naming any of these people just to maintain their
Absolutely, yeah.
privacy. She is a researcher, academic research, who's looking at women and cycling between 1950 and 1980. She said, I'm looking at
Oh.
gender geographies of cycling in South Asia during the 40s to the 80s. And my first thought was, my God, I'm going to have nothing. What do you mean? Cycling, women cycling between 19? And I did have people
Huh.
mentioning it in passing. I used to cycle to school. I owned this kind
I
of
mentioned
cycle.
it in passing. My grandfather cycled all the way from North Delhi to Central Delhi. Yeah.
Correct. I used to cycle. I was here. I was in this town, in this village. There was one woman who mentioned that in this village, I used to cycle. And I'll open up the interview as well since we're here. She said, I used to cycle. Not this, not this, not this. Sorry, I can't find it at the moment.
It's
But
okay. It's okay. Huh.
I used to cycle, and people would stare at me because it was uncommon in my town. And I have a strange feeling. It was in Talegaon. Talegaon between Bombay and Pune. And people used to stare at me because it was not very common for a girl randomly to cycle at home. Sorry, to somewhere on her own. We had people talking about, so that's the oddest request ever. And I've actually found 3 or 4 interviews that were useful for her.
Hmm.
And I felt very validated, I must say. Ki, "Acha, my archives got this also." Even recently, someone's been sitting in my office and doing some research on, labor and things like that in Bombay in the 70s and 80s. I said, look, that's not really our focus. People mentioned it in passing. She's going
Right.
through now 120 odd transcripts she's pulled out, and she's going through. She's like, yeah, all this is useful. I was like, very good, Karo. So,
Interesting.
and
So
so
for
use
research
cases.
is one more. Research is one
Research
more.
is the biggest one. Research and nostalgia are the biggest ones, but also cool things like Ramya's book. And
Yeah.
recently, a lady called Lubaina Bandukwala wrote a children's book about the secret Congress secret radio. And she used our interviews to sort of create that background of Bombay in the 1940s. And something I'm very proud of, the Miss Marvel TV show used some of our interviews as well,
Oh.
which
Oh.
which is really cool. So I like mentioning it.
Did they pay you for this?
Well, our contract is confidential, what and how they paid, but the relationships I keep with people. But to access our archive, yes, people do pay.
Yeah.
And people pay for it, and people pay for. We don't also charge a fortune. Again, it depends what kind of research. Are you an academic doing a research? Are you an undergrad student in Indian college doing research? Then it's really nothing. And if it's you're using it for a film and things like that, then we kind of look into each case. So people do pay. There's an administrative fee for that because it takes us a lot of work to pull out the right material.
Yeah.
And process it.
Figures.
And we never give someone a raw interview, we don't give them the whole interview, especially if they need audio or video. Then I have my editor edit the specific portion. There's a very particular vetting process also. When someone puts in a request, it takes, 6 to 8 weeks to even process it. I make sure that they're using it for specifically what
Right.
they
Right. Right.
And
Shweta,
but yes,
do you have
people pay for.
Yeah. Shweta, do you have anything to add to like the usefulness of this exercise?
So when she was talking about women cycling, I could imagine why a Nawari sari was so useful, because the Nawari sari goes in between the legs, becomes like a dhoti pant, and it is much more easier to cycle on that. And yes, there are stories. I think in a lot of, at least Maharashtrian old ladies is who I know. So they had a lot of stories about cycling many places.
Exactly.
I had this question for you, and um, so I am right now in the F&B space, right? And I'm very
Hmm?
close to food. So there must be so many, forget the recipes part of it, but so many old stories about food, like the
Yeah.
Sanja Chula concept, or the community kitchens, or the वो जो पुराने जमाने में वो बना के सुखा के, like the papads
Yeah.
and the
Mm,
non-papad things that you get tried in every
Yes.
culture. So all that must be, I mean, there that was a community activity or like
Hmm.
a neighborhood activity. So there must be so
mm,
many stories that come from there. Something interesting from that space.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I will say this because she recently wrote a book with her niece. Mrs. Asha Sheth is the great niece, is the daughter of K.D. Malviya and the great niece of Madan Mohan Malviya. And she
mm,
talked about the Malviya eating habits and the food. And she said the food was very specific. And she didn't grow up in that Malviya household her whole life. They moved uh, and her father was a freedom fighter and worked extensively with Lal Bahadur Shastri during the freedom movement.
mhm,
She remembers Mrs. Shastri's aloo parathas, and food plays a big part. But she told us about the Malviya way of eating, the rituals they would follow around their food, the food that they would cook. And she said, my niece, and I happened to know her niece. I didn't realize that that lady was her niece
mhm,
coincidentally. And she said that, we keep saying we'll write this Malviya cookbook. And I said, you must do it. And just 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, I think they released it. And I'm so happy that they did. And there is somebody else, not me, but somebody else doing a wonderful Indian recipe and cookbook and traditional recipe project. But food is a big community thing.
mm,
Achars that people specifically ate,
mm,
papad, how making food became a community activity, how it was a burden, how you cooked on a chulha,
mm,
with coal, or how you managed if you grew up in a village versus a city, and food shortages in the
mm,
43, 44, the Bengal famine and the rationing and food shortages, buying food on the black market.
mm,
What it was like, how bad the grain was, and what you would eat and what you wouldn't eat, and the chai you drank because sugar was limited. All
mm.
kinds of
Also,
things.
dalda, the introduction of
Dalda.
dalda.
Yeah.
Dalda. And recently, an interview he told me, and I'll have to verify this, but I think it's so interesting. He said the word black market did come from that World War time because there would be a ration shop and a black market. And I imagine that's true. I haven't looked into it, but I didn't know that.
Mm,
And even if I'm a historian with that works with this period, I learn something new every day. And I thought that was lovely. And yeah, lots of people going to boarding schools, people who are vegetarian at home going to boarding schools and having to eat meat. The
right.
food that this lady in the INA got in when she was in training
Mm,
in the INA, all kinds of things. Food is a big community thing, and songs. I get a lot of people to sing.
mm,
They tend not to like me asking them that.
mm,
Uh, but they do, and some of them have lovely, haunting voices, and they sing songs of
mm,
freedom, and they sing songs, community songs, and so many things. Some of them talk about food with a fruit. If they come in the partition, then a fruit that they only got the other side of the border, and they wish they got such good quality.
mm, mm,
They got, I have a lovely story from another project. So we don't only do the Generation 1947 project, which is this one that we've been talking about. We have a couple more. I was saying that we work with independent oral historians who come to us and say, tell me how to do this. And we take on their projects because storage and things cost a lot of money. So we already pay
right.
for that. We do a lot of the back end work. They don't have a team. It's just them.
Mm,
So we do all of that work, and they partner with us, and then we co-own the project with them 50-50 and do maybe about 70% of the all the hard back end work, the legal,
mm,
all of it. All they have to do is record the histories. And unless they record in a language that our team doesn't speak, then we ask them to
yeah.
please translate it as well.
Yeah.
But I have lost my train of thought. But
Yeah.
we were
I
talking
was
about
going to.
food. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I was going to ask you one last question because I also have to end this a little bit.
Yes, yes, yes.
But the last question being so access to your archive, right?
Yes.
If someone like Shweta wants to look up like food and beverages ka history, and maybe so, or someone like me wants to look at like policy making, if somebody spoke about policy making during that time, or how policies affected them during that time, just like rationing or anything that sort of interests me, or parliament reform where they're even aware of civics during that time, rights, duties, whatever.
Yes.
So how can we do this? Like, can we just approach you? Do we have to pay you like a
Yes.
fee? And will you help us archive it? How do you do it?
So you want to access it, you write to me.
Right.
And because, like I said, it's not just available freely on the internet, because these are people who have opened up
Of
about
course.
their
Of course.
lives.
Yeah.
And our initial idea was, I'll be free and for all and all that. Then we realized how much money it costs to actually do it, and we can't just simply make it free for all. How much money it costs to even put it online. And but we say, write to us, we vet the request, we vet the person. If you come with college credentials or your university has given you a letter, please send that to us. Anything helps. And then we pull out certain interviews for you. Or if you're in Bombay, please come to our office and you can search yourself as well. But usually we know the archive so well inside out that it helps. Like when you go to a library, you just ask the librarian, hey, I'm looking for this, and they can usually find a better book than we. Come to us, we'll pull out interview summaries for you. We'll discuss certain stories with you that we remember from our own interviews. And is this useful? Is this not? And we pull it out. Then you sign a contract with us saying you use it only for this. You will not misuse it, because that our first responsibility is to our interviewees. We want to provide wide access, but we want to take care of our interviewees. And we don't want anything they've said to be misused, which is very important to us. So we say, you use it in this context only. You show us finally when it's getting published or put somewhere what it is. That kind of thing, and you sign that contract. You pay an administrative fee for the administrative work of like pulling it out. We'll edit it again. We'll fact check it once again before giving it to the
how much is the ballpark, if you don't mind me asking?
It really depends. Again, we're reworking that a little bit at the moment. But yeah, but a photograph, for instance, can be very expensive. If you're looking at putting a photograph in a book that you're looking at, like say, for instance, now this is a ballpark, it really depends on what you want it for, a 5,000 rupee fee. But a transcript can be much cheaper if you're a student in a college. Then, if you have a student ID, and we're reworking it a little, but we used to give it for as little as 100 rupees. It's like that. So it really depends on your use, whether it's being published or not, whether it's a commercial project or not. If it's commercial, then it's more.
Right.
So because if you're making a movie, then it's also a lot more work on our part what we pull it out for.
Legit. That's actually
we don't like turning people away and things. We've always been able to help. So
and also you get
resource. Yeah. Go on, Shweta.
And I will say that if you have budgetary concerns, please feel free to share those with me, and we'll try and make it work. Of course. So
also there must be an element of credits, right? Like this was taken from the archive.
It is a 4-page contract that you sign before we give you the transcript or the photo or the video or whatever it is that you want, and it must be credited. It has to be, because that's how other people learn that this is a resource to be used. And I mean, we look at libraries and archives all over the country and the world and try to price ourselves accordingly. We're reworking them.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So
that is where I will have to end this. This has been really good. Thank you, Malvika. I was not expecting this. To be perfectly honest, I went in a little blind also this time.
That was not fun. I'm sorry, I really digressed some places. I think I don't know.
That's fine.
Yeah.
This is a podcast. It goes on. People don't mind. The more they hear, the more they love it. Shweta is an example of it. Shweta, but thank you so much for being here. Any last thoughts that you had about this whole thing?
No, I think this was so much fun. I got to know so many stories, more than just the process and how archiving works. I really got to know so many stories, so many interesting things, and a great resource to look at and reach out to. So this was
please do reach out to anyone who's listening to this and thinks that they could use us as a resource. We're happy.
So where can people write to you in case they want to reach out to you?
So they can write to me at info@citizensarchiveofindia.org. I will put it I will send it to you also, so you can put
Yeah,
it as a
we'll put
link.
it in the link as well. So
And
that's
right
good.
now we've almost set up our new donation space. It should be up on the website in a day or two. I'll just put that. But feel free to write to me. Feel free to when we'll put up sort of donation details very soon as well.
And
We
where can
just kind
people
of
follow you as well on social media?
Facebook, Instagram, Citizens Archive of India.
Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Instagram and Instagram is the best place to follow us. We have a website with these stories up as well, but we post a lot more often on Instagram. So
Yeah.
so and
That's
our
where the audience
website
is
is being
apparently.
redeveloped. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's our own
But
website.
Malvika, if I may say, the paying audience is all on Twitter. So, kya
Yeah.
matlab, like, which is what
See,
I'm
I
saying.
need
Just
someone.
because you paid for the
Yeah.
blue tick recently
Oh, you paid for
does
the blue
not
tick?
mean
You paid Mr. Musk for the blue tick.
Yeah, I played Elon Bhai.
Elon
More
Musk.
on that later. But Shweta, where can
I get
yeah?
on Twitter. I am on it personally, and I truly never got into it, which is bad of
Yeah.
me. I know. Yeah.
Shweta, do you want to tell people where they can follow you and anything you have to plug?
Can I plug my pod?
Sure, go
Okay.
on.
So I have a private Instagram account, guys. So please do not send me a request. I will not accept it. But I'm a big fan of the Cyrus's podcast on the IVM network. So you can find me on the Discord of the Cyrus's podcast in the YouTube comments of most IVM podcasts.
Yeah.
And I have a podcast of my own called the PS Talk Show. It's an audio only podcast. It's like two friends talking about random subjects, sometimes serious, sometimes fun. Available on Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon Music, just audio. So
Nice.
yeah,
We'll leave a link for that as well in the description so you can follow. I am on Twitter at me Meghnad and Instagram on Meghnad S. And again, for the listeners, if you want to be in Shweta's place as union leader of spectators, please write to me meghnad@pratilipi.com. Malvika has already applied. So
I am going to do.
yeah, our producer takes a call on that, guys. I don't. She's the one who takes the
Yeah, I
call
was
on
gonna
those
say I want to
things.
be on something like fun and pop culture. Yeah, don't put me on anything
You don't
political.
get that option,
Oh.
okay? That's one thing I must say to all union leader or spectators who are applying. I will throw you into random topics, and they can be
Oh.
political, and then you can't say no.
Yeah,
That will be bad
what
form.
is an influencer? And I was like, cool, I want to ask influencers questions.
See, yeah. So it can go either way. Okay. So
Okay.
no guarantees there. So if you are brave enough.
Now
to do
I'm
this.
thinking twice. But no, it sounds fun.
Yeah.
it's fun. It's fun. It's a lot of nervous energy just to find
Yeah, but
out
you
who
got
it's
me.
going
What
to
if I
be.
get
But
some
it's
like
fun.
economist or something and I don't have smart questions?
The other day, so my colleague Karan, so I got him as the union leader of spectators, and the guest was Manisha Pandey from News Laundry.
Okay.
And he's a fan, so he told me that he watches Nuisance and all the things. So the moment she came on screen, he was just stunned for 5 minutes. He just couldn't speak. So that might also happen, okay? So I might get someone who you're like a massive fan of, and suddenly you're like, holy shit, kya ho raha hai ye? So
Wow. Okay.
very exciting. I've sold this enough, so please write. But thank you so much, Malvika, for doing this. Thank you, Shweta, for doing this as well. I hope both of you had fun. I am
Thank
sure
you.
I
It was
did
so
have
much
fun.
fun. It was
It
so
was
Yeah.
much
fun.
fun.
Yes.
I mean, like I said, the amount we digressed, it was fun. So yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much, and I will see you next week, guys. Bye bye.